exact figure, it is much less. And proceeds from human trafficking is just a very tiny fraction of the money laundered globally. And human trafficking is an emerging topic globally right now. It's, there are a lot of initiatives to tackle them. It's because of people start to raise awareness, but also because the situation is exacerbating through all the war and refugee and also the lot of traffic flow. Globalization enables easy traffic flow between countries, especially the human flow from developing countries to developed countries, and that's where the human trafficking flow is going as well. And human trafficking is primarily comprised of three elements. One is men being trafficked, not necessarily across the border. Sometimes they can even remain in their own village. But the definition of it is basically forced labor, like forced contribution without their consent or by means of deception to sign them up into contracts they would otherwise not commit to. So it's, for men it's forced labor, for women it is sexual exploitation, and for children and for a lot of adults as well, for organ harvesting. And that is a severe issue. Bitcoin overall value is tiny compared to the previous. And I'm not going to make any suggestion here, but imagine they're roughly the same number. So global human trafficking victims are 24.5 million. And if you look at the Australian GDP comparing with proceeds from human trafficking, that's a difference of the value created from a well-run economy and people getting sold like livestock. Okay. So which activities are relevant to money laundering? So we're looking at things like bribery, corruption, like money laundering, extortion, forgery, piracy, tax evasion, which is, can be large and small, and I guess it's not very distant from us, from our lives. And price fixing, securities fraud in the financial market, and up to terrorism and war crime. So it goes along a long spectrum. But what does it mean? Like, what if so in real case scenario, what are the cases like, and what if we visualize them? So I'm going to show you some graphics that might make you uncomfortable, and if you don't want to see, you can close your eyes. But I'm going to show you. It's excruciating to gather those pictures, and I'm trying. Please don't take a picture of me standing in front of those. All right. So this is what it actually means by money laundering. So these are the things. So the man on the top left is showing. This is service on the dark web. They actually broadcast murder, right? And there's organ harvesting. There is poverty and collapsed bridges resulted from corruption and bribery, and there is there is illegal hunting, and there is terrorism, etc. All right. So this is the reason why we're doing anti-money laundering. It is not because AML is the most efficient or effective system in the world. It's got a lot of flaws, but the reason it exists is because we have no choice. We have to do something about it, and we don't have a better means. And AML is evolving constantly as well. We're using technology, we're integrating data sources, we're collaborating with governments and private sectors to tackle money laundering. So we've also done a lot of studies around the high-risk industries and the risk indicator in each crime category. So if you look at the first one, bribery and corruption, it is red flag across the board. Construction mixed with bribery and corruption result in collapsed bridges and buildings, which happened quite recently as well. And this is a graphic by Transparency International. So this is Corruption Perception Index. It's ranking all the countries in the world according to the level of corruption. Australia is not looking too bad comparative to our Asian neighbors. New Zealand is even better. Some North European countries are fairly good. China is somewhere in the middle. But the bad news is Australia is actually sliding on that every year. We're not doing better than last year. we're doing worse. Part of the reason is a lack of enforcement of corruption bribery cases by Australian regulators and governments. And part of the reason is a blurred line between gifts and payments facilitation business. That definition in Australia is not completely illegal, whereas in the UK it is very strictly forbidden. Okay, so this is in Chinese, this is English version. So AML, KYC, CDF, I'm sure you've heard of these buzzwords at some point, but what exactly do they mean? So they mean three separate things, right? So KYC, know your client, is normally the first thing that banks do. So when you go to one of the big four banks and open an account, they will need to check your ID. It can be your driver license, your ID card, your passport, and then sometimes they go to a third-party government database to check whether it is actually there, to verify you are who you say you are, and also have a look at the ID and see if it's likely to be forged. So that is to also it's to set up a good foundation for the AML and CTF later on, because they're going to use the information gathered from the ID verification to do the screening. So screening will cover money laundering and terrorist financing. And screening is basically the bank will put your name into a system like WorldCheck and go through it and see if you actually get a match. Most of the time, if there is a match, it would be a false positive. So if you put in G Smith, it's a very generic name, and you get 100 names from even just from Australia. But if there is a genuine match, then you won't be able to open a bank account. And sometimes bank will deny your access without giving you a reason, because it's part of the law is not to tip off risky or suspects, and that will be reported to Austrac for investigation. Yeah.
How do they handle that names aren't always the same?
Yeah, false positive. Yeah.
English or Latin?
Yeah, so there are different ways to do that. The database actually allows you to screen in Chinese script, and it allows a couple of, quite a lot of languages you can use. And you can also use secondary identifier like date of birth, country, nationality, place of birth, and place of residence to remove the false positives. So there are various ways to do it. And in the case where you can't, you still end up with 5 or 10 names. You can go into their profile and click and have a look at the story of the person, and sometimes look at the picture, but to see whether this is actually the person you're dealing with. So money laundering and terrorist financing by definition are very, very different. Money laundering is always from criminal proceeds, and the source of money is illegal. It might be spent on legal stuff, like they might use the illegal money to buy properties, buy Bitcoin, place it on all sorts of assets, or go to one popular way of laundering money is to go to casino, and after a couple of change of hands of the token, walk out and say, hey, this is the money I want from the casino. This is a very, very easy way to launder the money. So the way to identify them is via government lists, and do some web researches, commercial databases like WorldCheck, or doing transaction monitoring, which means to observe the transaction pattern of an individual over a period of time and pick out any abnormal transaction patterns. So if someone is moving money quickly into an account and out of the account a couple of times in a month, or if it's a dormant account, all of a sudden become very active and start transacting huge amount of money, and all those weird behavior will be picked up by the bank and reported to Austrac. Terrorist financing is, it's on the other spectrum. It is not usually large volume transactions, whereas money laundering normally quite large, quite chunky, because crime proceeds can be very, very huge. Whereas terrorist financing is like sprinkles here and there. They gather small pockets of money and gather together and transfer them to terrorist organizations to fund their activities. And they're driven by religious belief or political agenda, whereas money laundering is normally just driven by profitability. It's just for money. So that's organized crime. whereas terrorism is for political influence. So it's high frequency transactions. The sources might be from donation, sponsorship, salary, criminal proceeds. So there can be people who are part of that organization working legit jobs, like working really hard and getting the honest money and sending it to Middle Eastern countries to fund the fighters. The spending pattern is also very different. They tend to spend on a couple of items that are common for terrorist financing. So if they're buying weapons, ammunition, tools, chemicals, transport, telecommunication, or transfer the money to high-risk countries, that is an alert. And there is a list of high-risk countries for terrorism as well. And the same. So the way to identify terrorist financing risk is the same as money laundering. So you go through that commercial database, which I will introduce in a bit. So what is AUSTRAC? AUSTRAC is the government and legislative body and enforcement agency for anti-money laundering in Australia. It's just one of many globally. Generally, they follow the recommendation of Financial Action Task Force, which is FATF, based in Paris. So they are the standard setter of AML globally. And what they do every couple of years is to go around each country and do a mutual evaluation to look at the AML policies and procedures and programs and effectiveness of the AML programs in those countries and make recommendations. And those countries' enforcement agency, each enforcement agency will then go and and revise their laws and increase their enforcement. The purpose is to remain compliant with the global AML regime. And if a country is scored low in AML compliance, there is severe implication on their economy because that will impact their terms of trade, impact how banks are charging clients in those countries. It's going to impact how willing businesses are to expand and do business with those countries. So, and when it comes to the requirement on cryptocurrency exchanges, and by definition, it can be an actual exchange like Independent Reserve, Bitcoin, Australia, etc. It can also be an ICO, so that's the definition in Australia. As long as there's fiat and crypto changing hands, then it's defined as crypto exchange. So the exchanges need to maintain an AML CTF program, primarily 3 components of the actions. The first one is ID verification and due diligence, like what I just introduced. And they need to do suspicious matter reporting, threshold transaction reporting. And normally is any transaction above $10,000 will be reported. But then in transaction monitoring, there is one rule called report avoidance. So if someone is doing depositing money or withdrawing money or right below $10,000, like $9,999 or $8,000 even, frequently, and that behavior is considered as deliberately trying to escape the threshold transaction reporting, and that is going to be picked up in the SMR, suspicious matter reporting as well. Record keeping requirements, so everything they've done need to be retained to be submitted to AUSTRAC on an annual basis and be able to present in court as a defense in the case of any investigation. Any questions so far?
Is there any variation in whether it's an individual or a corporation?
Yeah, so for individuals, good question. So for individuals, it's just, normally it's just, A is ID verification, B is the screening, and C, so PETs and sanction screening. PETs are politically exposed people, which I'll explain, and transaction monitoring. So those 3. But then for corporations, there's also requirements to capture the ownership record. So ultimate beneficiary owners or controllers, and even with related entities if it's state-owned enterprises. So.
They're overseas owned?
Huh?
If they're overseas owned, or the base in
Yeah, so that's still required, but then obviously, you'll be subjected to information availability. So if you can provide proof of due diligence saying, I've done my job, and this is what I can find, even if it's blank report, it is still a proof of due diligence, and that is, in court, it's plausible deniability, which you can use. Hang on. So just a couple of enforcement cases, there are plenty, but I'm going to pick up just a few recently. There's someone got put in jail, 7 years of imprisonment, but that is not enforced by Australia. It's more following the criminal code of Australia for money laundering. Australia punished CBA and had a settlement of $700 million. Vincent in the US punished BTCE, which is a crypto exchange, $110 million. It's actually nothing compared to the AML fines to some banks. So there was 1 year, I can't remember which year, SEC and DOJ in the US punished, they fined BNP Paribas $9 billion. It nearly drove the bank out of business. So it's equivalent to a full year of revenue or profit by that bank. And it became a sort of a diplomatic issue between the US government and the French government. Yes, the AML laws is very extraterritorial, and UK Bribery Act will affect anyone who does business with UK citizens or has a branch in the UK, etc. So it's quite global. And Australia fined Tabcorp, MoneyGram, and Ripple Lab. I actually just met with someone from Ripple today. It's quite interesting to talk about this. So you can see the trend is there. The fines are looming larger, and that's not going to change. It's not like Bitcoin price. It's not going to go back and forth.
CBA was one that's related to the ATM transactions.
Yes, that's one of the issues they got. Yeah, but normally in this kind of large prosecution, there's like a lot of offenses. Yeah, they talk about like 50,000 offenses or something. Yeah. All right. So this is the couple of solutions we've got. I won't talk about solutions. That's my sales pitch, but just the process of managing third-party risks. And this is quite typical for a large organization. First of all, you gather the list of third parties, whether they're your clients or your vendors, or agents or distribution partners, anyone you deal with in your business. And surprisingly, that's quite often the most challenging step for a large business. A lot of them don't even know who their vendors are. Like they're just scattered in all kinds of databases. And once they've gathered that information, they need to do the screening of the individuals and organizations. And for those that come out from screening with a red flag, like if there's political links or if there's from high-risk jurisdictions, then they can undergo enhanced due diligence, which means gather more information. So they go to their local country to gather court records, to see any history of bankruptcy, law enforcement, litigation, and do a bit of media search. And then they need to pick up transactions patterns via transaction monitoring, and they need to do this on an ongoing basis as well, because someone who is not a PEP yesterday may become a PEP today after election or a change of government, or someone who is a PEP today might become a criminal tomorrow. So they need to constantly watch the activities. So these are some of the crypto clients we've got. In Japan, over half of the crypto exchanges are using WorldCheck, and in Australia, some large ones, and a lot of conversations going on. And these are the kinds of transaction monitoring. Yeah, a lot of second-tier banks, casino, gaming gambling companies, superannuation, insurance, etc. So this is the very famous WorldCheck database. The chance is if you have a bank with one of the big four, your name has been through this. So the data category includes the sanctions. So sanctions regimes globally, we include even the Russian and Chinese sanctions. So it's ideology-wise, it's neutral, that's also including government wanted lists like operational fox hunt from China. Like we include the leaks as well, like Panama Papers. And we include lists from not only Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia or Office of Foreign Asset Control in the US, which are sanctioned issuers, but also Europol, Interpol, FBI, CIA wanted. Yeah. There's but that's only about 25% of the data in WorldCheck. The majority of the information is gathered from news articles and all sorts of decentralized data sources. And we've done a lot of studies into groups of terrorism and criminal groups. Like I said, they act very differently, but these days they're becoming more intertwined. So criminal groups rely on terrorist groups to provide protection and political influence, whereas terrorist groups use criminal proceeds to fund their activities. So it's not one or the other.